Imagine a warm, sunny day. The sun shines bright and gentle. Fluffy clouds drift across a clear blue sky. Birds sing, cars pass by, people talk in the distance. You're walking down the street, enjoying the air, lost in your thoughts. Everything around you is familiar, ordinary, and you feel safe. You keep walking, and at some point, your stream of thoughts fades away. You stop, look around, and suddenly realize that something has changed. The silence is not only in your head, it's outside too. The air has become heavy and thick. It no longer feels pleasant and warm, it feels stifling, maybe even hot. The sun is painfully bright, buildings and trees look oddly flat, shadows vanish, and then, in the next moment, shadows stretch unnaturally long and dark, so sharp that the contrast seems to cut your eyes. Time itself feels frozen. The space around you feels empty and somehow wrong. Everything is familiar, yet everything looks different. You feel thrown off balance, as if it's not happening to you, as if you are watching from the outside. The only sound you can hear is your own heartbeat. You start to feel like you're alone in the entire world, alone inside a single frozen frame of some stupid film. And at the same time you feel exposed, as if you're on display, and something unfriendly is staring straight at you. Fear strikes through your body like icy needles and paralyzes you. And then, in an instant, you hear birds again. Somewhere far away, a car drives by. The spell breaks. This short immersive scene describes a common experience that some people call midday horror. The term isn't widely used in the English-speaking internet. There is no established research focused specifically on midday horror as a named phenomenon. It's best understood as a subjective cluster of sensations, and yet many people recognize it instantly. It has also found its way into art, which we'll discuss later. In this video, you'll learn what midday horror is, how it manifests, what might cause it, and how it appears in culture and art. Midday horror is an intense, hard-to-explain fear that arises on a sunny day, most often between 12 to 3 p.m., when the sun is high. It tends to happen outdoors, especially in open spaces. It can show up as anxiety or panic, realization, and depersonalization. Normally we associate horror with darkness, night, shadows, the unknown. The unsettling twist here is that terror arrives in broad daylight, when nothing should be scary, and that contradiction becomes part of the horror itself. We don't know for sure what causes midday horror. Most likely it's a combination of factors. Let's go through them. Biological factors. First, plain biology. Midday can be dangerous, especially in summer when temperatures peak. Most living beings instinctively seek shade from harsh light and heat. If someone is caught in an open place with nowhere to hide, they can suffer heat exhaustion or sunstroke, and for some people, extreme heat can be life-threatening. In many cases, people experience midday horror in open, empty spaces. For our ancestors, and for many animals, being alone in open terrain on a bright, clear day could be a serious risk, especially without a group nearby. In such places, you can become easy prey for a predator hidden in tall grass or in trees. It's possible that this kind of fear, like fear of darkness, heights, or snakes, became partially wired in over time as a protective mechanism, discouraging us from staying alone in exposed, sunlit spaces. In that sense, midday horror may overlap with agoraphobia, which can include fear of open spaces. Another possible explanation is psychological. Midday horror resembles a different phenomenon, the uncanny valley. This topic deserves its own video, so I'll keep it brief. The uncanny valley describes discomfort that arises when something looks almost familiar, almost human, but not quite. For example, many people feel uneasy looking at AI-generated faces. The image is realistic, but small details give it away. Unnatural expressions, strange posture, off microfeatures. The mismatch between expectation and reality creates dissonance, which can trigger anxiety or even panic. In midday horror, the uncanny valley effect may appear as unnatural silence and emptiness. When we're outside, we're usually surrounded by sound. In cities, cars, voices, traffic lights. In suburbs and villages, birds, insects, wind in the trees, distant human activity. We're also usually surrounded by other people, so when those sounds disappear and people vanish, the world feels frozen, unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Light also plays a role. Familiar objects can look strange under harsh midday sun. Even the sky on an extremely bright day can feel uncanny, flat and deep at the same time, pressing down on you. When the sun is near its zenith, shadows can become oddly sharp and dark. or in some conditions disappear entirely, making the world look flat and artificial. A striking illustration is a phenomenon sometimes called zero shadow day, often discussed in relation to places like Hawaii. Twice a year, around midday, the sun passes nearly directly overhead and vertical objects briefly lose their shadows. Poles and bollards can look strangely flat, like props in an old video game. Even the name associated with Lahaina is sometimes translated as cruel sun, which fits the tone perfectly. Put these factors together, flatness, unnatural brightness, isolation, stillness, heat, and you get a cocktail that can trigger the realization the world starts to feel like a dream. I'd also add a socio-historical layer. For many societies, survival depended on weather and climate. Drought driven by prolonged heat without rain could destroy crops and doom entire settlements. Heat and intense sun also increase the risk of wildfires, which can wipe out harvests, homes, livestock, and lives. Even today, we know how quickly heat can turn from pleasant to dangerous. Now let's try a philosophical angle. I haven't found philosophical systems that focus specifically on midday horror by that name, but we can connect the experience to concepts philosophers had described for centuries. From a philosophical perspective, midday horror can be understood as something deeper than simple fear or illusion. It can feel like a moment when perception, time, and meaning themselves begin to tremble, and thinkers like Heidegger, Sartre, and Camus described states very close to this long before the term existed. Heidegger distinguishes fear from anxiety. Fear has an object, a sound, a shadow, a possible threat. Anxiety doesn't. It arises out of nowhere and reveals the world itself as strange, hollow, and meaningless. In anxiety, the familiar world withdraws. Objects lose their everyday significance, and we face existence stripped of comfort. Midday horror can feel like a Heideggerian moment, when the veil of routine tears, and the world appears without its usual interpretations. Sartre called a similar sensation nausea, the realization that things simply exist, absurdly without reason. In nausea, the protagonist looks at a tree root and feels sick, not from danger, but from the sheer fact of being. Midday horror can feel like the same existential dizziness. Bright, indifferent sunlight forces you to confront existence without meaning, without narrative. Merleau-Ponty argued that we never perceive the world objectively. We co-create it through perception, through depth, moment, habit, and embodied presence. But sometimes perception itself glitches, the world stops feeling lived in and becomes a flat image, as if it were constructed. Harsh light and disappearing shadows can trigger exactly that, revealing how fragile our sense of reality actually is. If I summarize all these perspectives into one idea, it might be this. Midday horror is a sudden, direct contact with the world as it is, not as we usually experience it through cultural meaning and mental habits. It's existential fear, the realization that the world exists on its own, cold and indifferent. That meaning is not out there, but something we constantly create. And that time, as we feel it, can distort or even collapse. Silence, emptiness, isolation, and harsh light create ideal conditions for that kind of encounter. Now it's time for the most interesting part, how this phenomenon is represented in art and culture. In many cultures and ancient religions, the sun plays a central role. People connected it to gods and spirits, performed rituals, and offered sacrifices. That makes sense. The sun gives light, warmth, and life. It makes agriculture possible. But it can also be dangerous. During drought, it can destroy crops. It can cause wildfires. It affects human health. Across history, people faced heat stroke and sudden death after exhausting labor under burning sun. A literal embodiment of midday horror in Slavic folklore is Poludnica, also known as Lady Midday or Noon Witch. In folklore, she appears in fields around noon, and meeting her is rarely a good sign. Many modern audiences recognize her from the Witcher universe, where the image is adapted but still captures her essence. A pale, field-hunting ghost connected to suffering, unfinished grief, and danger under the midday sun. Across regions, her appearance varies. Sometimes she is a beautiful woman in white, sometimes an old, frightening hag, sometimes something more monstrous. She may carry a sickle, linking her to harvest, punishment, and death. Some traditions associate her with wind or whirlwinds in the fields, which may explain tales of a towering figure. Farmers saw spinning dust and felt something supernatural was passing through. In many versions, Poludnica is tied to unclean death, the restless dead, wrong brides, victims of violence, witches, or those who died before a proper life transition. She is said to live among crops, rye, wheat, peas. guarding the fields from harm. She's hostile to humans and was often blamed for sudden death during field work, ruined harvests, or even the disappearance of children. There was also an unwritten rule. At midday, people should return home, eat, pray, feed livestock. Working at noon was forbidden. Sleeping in the field was forbidden. Those who broke the rule risked punishment, headaches, weakness, sunstroke, and in harsher versions, death. Some legends say she challenges people with questions, forcing them to speak continuously. If you fall silent or fail, she harms you, but if you endure the test, she may leave you alone. In ancient Greek mythology, a related motif appears around Pan, a god of wild nature, shepherds, and sudden fear. Pan is linked to Arcadian growth and ecstatic dances, but also to sacred stillness. In some traditions, midday quiet was considered holy. Shepherds feared breaking it, afraid of provoking Pan. Strange sounds echoing in the mountains were attributed to him, and the sudden terror that rises from silence gained the name panic. Across cultures, when the sun reaches its height or the day stretches to its longest, communities respond with ritual, not only celebration, but protection, purification, and boundary crossing. In Lithuania and the Baltic region, Joninės is celebrated around June 23-24 with Christian and pagan roots. Bonfires are lit, and legends speak of a fern flower that blooms only in a magical liminal moment of midsummer night. Among Slavic peoples, Kupala night includes wreath cast into water, fire jumping, and symbolic acts that balance heat and flame with water and cleansing. In Nordic countries, midsummer is marked with flower crowns, maypoles, bonfires, fertility motifs, and the strange brightness of near-endless summer light. These traditions show that peak light isn't only comfort, it's a threshold. The life-giver becomes a test. And what if, at that threshold, when the world is too bright, too silent, too still, the familiar reality turns strange? That is the heart of midday horror. Light doesn't soothe, it reveals. In cinema, one of the strongest illustrations of midday horror combined with solstice ritual is Midsommar. After the sudden death of her parents and sister, Dani falls into severe depression. Her boyfriend Christian, an anthropology student, already exhausted by the relationship, reluctantly takes her alone to Sweden for a midsummer festival he planned to attend with friends for academic reasons. Cut off from the modern world, the community performs rituals with ancient tradition. And soon it becomes clear that these rituals are far from harmless. In Midsommar, midday horror acts like an atmosphere that makes everything more absurd and more unbearable. Dani's grief, the cruelty of the rituals, and the community's distorted normality clash violently with warm, sunny days. The sun in the film is bright, relentless, almost physical, intensifying discomfort, dissociation, and unreality. Hallucinogens used during rituals deepen the sense that what's happening is both beautiful and profoundly wrong. A coming-of-age story set in 1950s rural Idaho, blending vampirism, surrealism, symbolism, and religious fanaticism. Much of it unfolds in open air, ruined farms, wet fields, oppressive daylight. The idyllic sunlit image clashes with decay, violence, and secrets, another strong match for horror and light. There's even a loose umbrella label for this kind of thing. Daylight horror, horror where the most disturbing events happen not at night, but during the day, often outdoors. It doesn't always match the exact midday horror pattern, but it shares the same reversal. Daylight becomes the stage for dread. Several schoolgirls and their teacher disappeared during a picnic on a bright summer day in 1900 Australia, and the mystery infects the entire community. The film is drenched in luminous sunlight. One eerie detail: the characters watched stop around noon, a perfect visual metaphor for time freezing. Absence, silence, heat, incomprehension. Quintessential midday horror. The main motifs in midday horror paintings are isolation, loneliness, and strangeness. Anxiety is created through open spaces, harsh contrast, and, most importantly, the play of light and shadow. We can't prove that any artist intended to depict midday horror specifically, but some works, intentionally or not, capture the exact atmosphere. For me, the most precise examples are works by Edward Hopper. His paintings don't show violence or monsters. They are realist, everyday scenes, yet they are filled with loneliness and a frozen, waiting quality. Hopper simplifies forms and details, uses saturated color, and makes light and shadow central, which creates a powerful sense of isolation. Empty streets, isolated buildings, lonely characters, bright lighting, and long dark shadows – these are the main features of his works. Andrew Wyatt, Christina's World. This painting fits our theme beautifully. Open field, harsh daylight, and single vulnerable figure, a distant house that feels cold rather than safe. Brightness emphasizes exposure. The history behind this picture is very interesting, so we can discuss it in a separate video. Next is Bill Stoneham and his prominent painting The Hands Resist Him, which I suppose many of you have already seen before. Bright contrasting colors and play of light make this picture truly horrifying. In the picture we can see a boy standing outside. His silhouette is lit by bright sunlight, while behind the doors there is complete darkness. Many other details make this picture scary and interesting for analysis. The history behind this picture is also quite interesting, but here we only note what is relevant to our topic. If you're interested in learning more about this picture's background and about other scary pictures, let me know in the comments, and I'll be happy to investigate this in a separate video. I also want to mention here Giorgio de Chirico and his Mystery and Melancholy of a Street and the Enigma Day pictures. Both are excellent for uncanny daylight. As mentioned, Paludnica appears in The Witcher 3. We have two quests that involve dealing with her. In the game, Paludnica is the ghost of women who died a sudden or violent death, or as a result of suicide. We can find their remains and release their souls. Speaking of less popular games, I'd also like to mention a project called Midday Horror. It's an add-on map for Gary Smootle's sandbox. You wake up in an overexposed field at noon, with the sun feeling unreal and inescapable, as a distilled midday horror scenario. And that was all I wanted to tell you about how midday horror is represented in art and mass culture. If you know other examples of such representation, please share them in the comments. I would also like to share my experience. When I was about 7, I visited my grandmother. She lived in a house with a spacious yard and a lake nearby. It was a hot sunny day, and she decided to take a nap after lunch. So I stayed alone, awake, and decided to sit in the yard in the sun. Everything was fine for a while. I was enjoying the warmth, until I suddenly felt fear. The world around me froze, and I had a strong feeling that somebody was watching me, which was impossible, because the yard was surrounded by a high fence. All things around me contrasted with the bright sky and looked dark and flat. No sounds, just hidden stillness. I jumped up and ran into the house. After this incident, I was afraid to stay alone outside and didn't like when somebody asked me to bring something from the yard or garden. And maybe that's why midday horror stays with people. Not because something attacked us, but because for a few seconds the world stopped performing its usual role. The stage lights stayed on, but the actors left. And at that bright emptiness we felt what philosophers and artists keep circling, the fragile miracle of meaning, and how quickly it can vanish. If you've experienced something like this, tell me what it felt like, where you were, and what the light looked like. And if you want a second video on eerie paintings, daylight horror films, let me know. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video.